Bullies grabbed her arm to scare her. She snapped his elbow mid-walk. Kira Blackwood had perfected the art of invisibility at Roosevelt High School. With her slight frame, oversized glasses, and habit of keeping her dark hair pulled forward to shield her face, she moved through the crowded hallways like a ghost. Her clothes were always clean, but never fashionable, chosen more for their ability to help her blend into the background than make any statement. She transferred to Roosevelt 3 months ago when her military father received new orders, and she'd hoped this time would be different. It wasn't. The cafeteria at Roosevelt High was a battlefield disguised as a dining hall, with its long tables arranged like trenches and fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows over teenage politics. Kira sat alone at the far end of a table near the emergency exit, methodically eating her sandwich while reading a worn paperback. She'd learned to eat quickly and quietly, finishing before anyone noticed her presence. "Look what we have here," came a voice dripping with manufactured charm. Kira's shoulders tensed without her looking up. She recognized the voice of Blake Morrison, Roosevelt's self-appointed king of cruelty. Blake was everything Kira wasn't: tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident swagger that came from never having to question his place in the world. His sandy hair was always perfectly styled, and his clothes screamed expensive casualness. Blake approached with his usual entourage: Trevor Mills, his loyal lieutenant with dead eyes and quick fists, and Jessica Hartwell, whose beauty was matched only by her talent for psychological warfare. They moved through the cafeteria like sharks, sensing blood in the water, and today Kira was bleeding. "Earth to freak," Blake said, snapping his fingers inches from Kira's face. "I'm talking to you." Kira slowly raised her eyes, keeping her expression neutral. She'd learned that showing fear only encouraged them, but showing defiance made things worse. "I'm just eating lunch," she said quietly. "Just eating lunch?" Jessica mimicked in a baby voice, causing several nearby students to snicker. "Oh, look at her. She thinks she can just sit here like a normal person." Trevor reached over and flicked Kira's book out of her hands. It skittered across the floor, pages fluttering. "What's this garbage? The Art of War? Planning to take over the chess club, military brat?" Kira's jaw clenched at the term, but she said nothing. She stood to retrieve her book, but Blake's hand shot out, pressing against her chest and pushing her back into her seat. "Did I say you could move?" The cafeteria had grown quieter, other students sensing drama but careful not to get involved. Kira's eyes darted around the room, looking for any teacher or adult who might intervene. Mrs. Patterson, the lunch monitor, was engrossed in her phone at the far end of the room, oblivious to the unfolding scene. "Please," Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want any trouble." "Too late for that," Blake said, his smile turning predatory. He grabbed Kira's lunch tray and tilted it slightly, letting her apple roll off and bounce across the floor. Oops, Butterfingers. What Blake and his friends didn't know was that Kira Blackwood had been trained by one of the most decorated Special Forces operatives in the military. Her father, Colonel James Blackwood, had taught her Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and combat techniques that most people only saw in movies. But her father had also taught her something else: discipline. "Violence is a tool of last resort," he'd always said. "A smart warrior chooses their battles." So Kira endured. She cleaned up her scattered lunch, ignored the laughter, and promised herself that this too would pass. She'd survived 4 different schools in 6 years. She could survive Roosevelt High. But the bullying only escalated. The next incident happened in the hallway between 2nd and 3rd period. Kira was walking to her chemistry class when she felt someone deliberately bump into her shoulder hard enough to send her sprawling. Her books scattered across the polished floor, and she heard Blake's voice behind her. "Watch where you're going, freak." Students stepped around her fallen books like they were obstacles to avoid. A few even kicked them further down the hall. Kira gathered her things in silence, her face burning with humiliation. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, but not one person offered to help. In chemistry class, she found her lab station vandalized. Someone had written "loser" in permanent marker across her notebook cover. Her lab partner, a quiet girl named Emma Rodriguez, gave her a sympathetic look but said nothing. Kira understood. Getting involved meant becoming a target. The pattern continued for weeks. Blake and his crew seemed to have made tormenting Kira their personal mission. They would appear when she least expected it, always when no teachers were around, always with just enough witnesses to maximize her humiliation. They cornered her in the library, whispering cruel comments about her appearance until she fled to the bathroom. They followed her to the parking lot after school, making loud comments about her military daddy and whether he'd taught her to kill people. They even recruited other students, turning her isolation into a school-wide entertainment. Through it all, Kira remained silent. She went to class, did her homework, and tried to become even more invisible, but every night she practiced. In the garage of their base housing, she worked through combat drills with methodical precision. Her movements were fluid, powerful, and deadly accurate. She could break boards with her bare hands, execute throws that would send a grown man flying, and strike with enough force to disable an opponent in seconds. But she held back. Her father's words echoed in her mind. The strongest person in the room is often the one who chooses not to fight. Everything changed on a Tuesday in November. Kira had been assigned to work with Emma Rodriguez on a chemistry project. Emma was one of the few students who hadn't actively participated in the bullying, and over the course of their partnership, they'd developed a tentative friendship. Emma was kind, intelligent, and genuinely interested in Kira's thoughts and opinions. For the first time since arriving at Roosevelt, Kira felt like she might have found someone who saw her as more than a target. They were walking together toward the science wing when Blake and his crew intercepted them. The hallway was mostly empty. It was the brief window between lunch and fifth period when most students were either in class or lingering in the cafeteria. "Well, well," Blake said, positioning himself directly in front of them. "Look who found herself a friend." Emma instinctively stepped closer to Kira. "We're just going to class," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I wasn't talking to you," Blake snapped, his eyes fixed on Emma with a calculating look that made Kira's skin crawl. "Actually, Emma, I've been thinking. You're too pretty to be hanging around with trash like this." Trevor and Jessica flanked them, blocking their path to the science wing. Other students began to notice the commotion, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. "Just leave us alone," Emma said, but her voice was getting smaller. Blake ignored her, focusing on Kira. "You know what I think? I think you're using Emma here, making her feel sorry for you so she'll do your homework. That's pretty pathetic, even for you." "That's not true," Emma protested, but Blake cut her off. "Emma, sweetie, you don't need to defend her. Everyone knows what she is." Blake's voice carried across the hallway, ensuring that every student could hear. "Her daddy's a baby killer, and she's just a weird little freak who probably tortures animals in her spare time." Kira's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Come on, Emma, let's just go around them." But as they tried to move past, Blake made his fatal mistake. He reached out and grabbed Emma's arm, his grip tight enough to leave marks. "I said I wasn't done talking." Emma winced in pain, and something inside Kira snapped. Not anger, something much colder and more dangerous. The discipline her father had taught her was still there, but now it served a different purpose. She was no longer holding back to avoid conflict. She was calculating the most efficient way to end it. "Let go of her," Kira said, her voice completely steady. Blake laughed, his grip on Emma's arm tightening. "Or what? You gonna tell your daddy on me?" "I'm going to ask you one more time," Kira said, stepping closer. Her posture had changed subtly. Her weight shifted to the balls of her feet, her shoulders relaxed but ready. "Let go of her." "Make me," Blake said. and reached for Kira with his free hand. He never saw it coming. Kira's response was instantaneous and surgical. She caught Blake's wrist as he grabbed for her, her fingers finding the precise pressure point that would cause maximum pain. In the same motion, she stepped into his space and drove her elbow upward into his solar plexus. Blake's breath left him in a whoosh, and his grip on Emma loosened. But Kira wasn't finished. As Blake doubled over, gasping for air, she maintained her grip on his wrist and stepped behind him. With a quick, precise movement, she hyperextended his elbow joint. The sound of ligaments straining filled the hallway, followed by Blake's scream of pain. The entire confrontation lasted less than 5 seconds. Blake collapsed to his knees, cradling his injured arm. Trevor started forward, but stopped when he saw the look in Kira's eyes. For the first time, people were seeing past her quiet exterior to the trained warrior beneath. "Trevor," Kira said calmly, "I'd think very carefully about your next move." Trevor was bigger than Blake, and he'd never backed down from a fight in his life. But something about Kira's tone, the way she stood perfectly balanced and ready, made him hesitate. In that moment of hesitation, he saw what Blake had missed. Kira wasn't afraid. She'd never been afraid. She'd been choosing not to fight. "You broke my arm," Blake gasped from the floor. "No," Kira said, not taking her eyes off Trevor. "I hyperextended your elbow. It'll heal in a few weeks if you ice it and don't do anything stupid." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But if you ever touch Emma again, if you ever touch anyone again, I'll show you what a broken arm actually feels like." Jessica had gone pale, pressing herself against the lockers. The circle of students had grown larger, but they were completely silent. Everyone was staring at the girl who'd just dismantled their school's most feared bully with clinical precision. Emma looked at Kira with a mixture of awe and concern. "Kira, are you okay?" The question seemed to break Kira out of her combat mindset. She looked around at the faces surrounding them, some shocked, some frightened, some admiring. She realized that in defending Emma, she'd revealed herself completely. There was no going back to invisibility now. "I'm fine," she said, offering Emma a small smile. "Are you hurt?" Emma shook her head, rubbing her arm where Blake had grabbed her. "I'm okay. Thank you." Blake struggled to his feet, still clutching his elbow. His face was flushed with pain and humiliation. "This isn't over," he managed to say. Kira turned to face him fully, and Blake took an involuntary step backward. "Yes, it is," she said quietly. "You made your choice when you grabbed her. Now you get to live with the consequences." Mr. Henderson, the chemistry teacher, finally arrived on the scene. "What's going on here?" he demanded, looking around at the crowd of students. "Nothing," Kira said before anyone else could speak. "Blake fell and hurt his elbow. I was just helping him up." Blake opened his mouth to protest, but Trevor grabbed his good arm. "Yeah," Trevor said quickly. "He just slipped. Clumsy." Mr. Henderson looked suspicious, but with no one contradicting the story, he had little choice but to accept it. "All right, everyone get to class. Blake, you should go to the nurse." As the crowd dispersed, Blake fixed Kira with a look of pure hatred. But underneath the anger, she could see something else: fear. For the first time in his life, Blake Morrison had encountered someone who wasn't intimidated by his size, his status, or his cruelty. The news of the confrontation spread through Roosevelt High like wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone knew that quiet Kira Blackwood had put Blake Morrison on the floor with moves that belonged in an action movie. The details grew more elaborate with each telling, but the core truth remained. The girl everyone had dismissed as weak had revealed herself to be anything but. In the days that followed, the social dynamics of Roosevelt High shifted dramatically. Blake returned to school with his arm in a sling, claiming he'd been injured in a football accident. But everyone knew the truth. The king of cruelty had been dethroned by someone he'd considered beneath his notice. Trevor and Jessica gave Kira a wide berth, no longer confident in their ability to intimidate her. Other students who'd been targets of Blake's crew began to find their voices, inspired by Kira's example. The hallways became a little less hostile, a little more hopeful. But perhaps the most significant change was in Kira herself. She no longer walked with her head down or hid behind her hair. She still dressed simply and spoke quietly, but there was a new confidence in her posture. She'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be a victim. Emma became her closest friend, and their partnership in chemistry class blossomed into something deeper. They studied together, ate lunch together, and discovered they shared a love of old movies and bad puns. For the first time in years, Kira felt like she belonged somewhere. One afternoon, about a month after the confrontation, Kira was walking to her locker when she found Blake waiting for her. He was alone, his arm finally out of its sling, and he looked uncomfortable. "I need to talk to you," he said. Kira studied his face, looking for signs of aggression or deception. She found neither. "Okay." Blake glanced around to make sure they were alone, then took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for what I did to you, for what I did to Emma, for everything." Kira was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" she asked finally. "Because I was wrong," Blake said. "I thought making other people feel small would make me feel bigger, but it just made me smaller." He looked down at his hands. "My mom found out what happened. She made me realize that I was becoming someone I don't want to be." "And what do you want to be?" Kira asked. Blake met her eyes. "Better than I was." Kira nodded slowly. "Apology accepted," she said. "But Blake, yeah, if you ever hurt someone again, if you ever make someone feel the way you made me feel, I'll finish what I started in that hallway. And next time, I won't hold back." Blake swallowed hard. "I understand." As he walked away, Kira reflected on how much had changed. She'd come to Roosevelt High trying to be invisible, hoping to avoid conflict by avoiding notice. But sometimes, she'd learned, the only way to find peace is to be willing to fight for it. She thought about her father's words. "A smart warrior chooses their battles." She'd chosen hers, and in doing so, she'd discovered that strength wasn't about the ability to hurt others. It was about the courage to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The bell rang, signaling the end of another day at Roosevelt High. Kira gathered her books and headed for the exit, where Emma was waiting with a smile and a joke about their chemistry homework. As they walked toward the parking lot together, Kira realized that she was no longer trying to be invisible. She was exactly where she belonged, seen, respected, and unafraid. The quiet storm had found her voice, and Roosevelt High would never be the same.